Wren Halcyon stood at the edge of the moon court auction in a borrowed dress that pinched at the ribs and slid off one shoulder like it wanted to abandon her. The fabric was too pale for her skin, too fine for her hands, too honest for what this place really was. It wasn't meant to fit her. It was meant to remind her she didn't belong. Above her, chandeliers glowed with moonstone light. Below them, the nobility drifted in silk and perfume, laughing like they hadn't built their world on other people's throats. They called tonight a celebration of unity. They called it tradition. They called it necessary. Wren knew what it really was. Tonight, unranked girls weren't guests. They were inventory, behind velvet curtains. She heard the soft clink of chains, not loud enough to disrupt the music, not loud enough to ruin the illusion, just loud enough to keep the unranked from forgetting their place. Wren had been here before twice. She'd watched other girls get paraded out like prizes. She'd watched men with polished rings and polished smiles bid on bodies as if they were horses. She told herself she wouldn't shake this time, but her palms were damp anyway, and her throat felt tight, as if the room itself was trying to swallow her. A bell chimed. The crowd's attention swung toward the dais, where the master of ceremonies lifted a silver goblet and beamed like a saint. "May the moon court shine for all," he announced, "and may unity be renewed." Laughter rippled. Glasses clinked. Somewhere, a girl behind the curtain made a sound that might have been a sob. Quickly smothered, Wren's stomach turned. She kept her chin up. That was the only thing she owned here, her chin. Her spine. Her refusal to bow. And then the air shifted, not the way it did when someone important walked in, demanding attention by force of wealth. This was different. This felt like the room had been holding its breath and finally decided to exhale. A path opened through the crowd as if everyone had been trained to move aside before the blade fell. Duke Garrick Valtrain approached with a slow confidence that made Wren's skin crawl. He was the kind of man people called charming because they'd never been alone with him. His smile was perfect. His eyes were not. They looked past faces, past humanity, cataloging weaknesses like merchandise. He stopped in front of her as if he'd been expecting her to be right where she stood. "Wren Halcyon," he said, like her name was something sweet on his tongue. Still stubborn, still breathing. "I do admire consistency." Wren didn't answer. She'd learned years ago that giving him a reaction was like tossing meat into a pen of starving dogs. His gaze dragged down her dress, lingering at the borrowed seams. "Astray with pretty eyes," he mused, loud enough for those nearby to hear. A few nobles laughed as if he'd offered a clever joke. Wren felt heat crawl up her neck. Humiliation mixing with rage until it tasted like metal. Garrick stepped closer. The scent of him expensive cologne over something rotten filled her lungs. His voice dropped. "Just for her. You'll sign my contract before midnight," he murmured, smooth as velvet. "Or I'll make you beg for ink." Wren's fingers curled hard enough to hurt. Her hands shook not from fear, not even from the threat itself, but from the sick certainty underneath it. From the reality that the people around them would watch him crush her and call it lawful. She forced her voice steady. "Contracts require consent." Garrick's smile widened by a fraction. "Consent is a pretty word," the powerless repeat to feel less powerless. His gaze flicked to her collarbone, as if he could already see a chain there. Already imagine the mark he wanted stamped into her skin. Then he straightened and turned slightly, letting the room see him with her as if she were a trophy he was about to claim. "You should be grateful," he said, louder again. "Valtrain House doesn't collect strays often, but when we do, we make them useful." Wren's stomach clenched. She saw the future the way she always did with Garrick the Gilded Cage. The signed paper. The slow erasure. She tasted the midnight he'd promised her, and for one brutal heartbeat, she believed it, because no one was going to stop him. Then the lights dimmed. Not gradually, not romantically, but as if someone had reached up and snuffed the stars one by one. The chandeliers flickered. Conversation faltered. A cold wind slid across every candle, bending flames low in sudden fear. Ren's breath caught. The doors at the far end of the hall groaned open. Silence crashed down like a wave. A figure stepped through the threshold, and the air changed with him, heavier, colder, charged like the moment before lightning strikes. The shadows at the edges of the room seemed to lean in, eager, as if they recognized their master. King Kalen Nightmore didn't walk. He hunted. Slow, precise, inevitable. He moved with a predator's patience. The kind that didn't need speed because it always reached its prey eventually. His dark coat swallowed the moonlight. The silver at his throat caught it like a blade. His presence pressed against Ren's skin like a hand firm, claiming space, forcing awareness. The court didn't breathe. They just watched. Ren watched too. Because she couldn't stop herself. Because something inside her, something old and buried, lifted its head as he came closer. As if it recognized him, the way a wound recognizes salt. Kalen's gaze swept the room once. Cold and indifferent. Sliding past jeweled women and proud men like they were furniture. Then it landed on Ren, and stayed. It felt like being seen for the first time in her life. Not looked at. Not appraised. Seen. Her heart stumbled in her chest. She hated it. She hated that her body reacted to him like he mattered. Like he was the answer to a question she'd never dared to ask. Kalen crossed the room without hesitation, ignoring nobles who bowed, ignoring Garrick Valtrain's careful smile, ignoring the whispered panic that clung to the walls. He stopped in front of Ren, close enough that her pulse betrayed her, loud in her ears, hot against the cold he carried. Garrick's voice slid in like oil. "Your Majesty." What an unexpected... Kalen didn't look at him. Instead, he lifted something from his hand, a ceremonial chain. Dark metal, etched with runes that looked like they'd been written in night itself. The Night Oath sigil. Every person in the Moon Court knew what it meant. A binding, a consort's collar. The court seemed to brace, expecting him to turn, to choose a highborn lady with a bloodline worth the trouble. Instead, Kalen's eyes stayed on Ren. His voice was low, rougher than she expected, as if it hadn't been used gently in a long time. "May I?" Ren blinked. Confusion flashed through her so sharply it almost hurt. A king asking permission felt like a myth, like a trick, like a story mothers told daughters to make the world seem less cruel. She should have refused. She should have stepped back. She should have remembered what men like Garrick did, what powerful men always did. But Kalen didn't reach for her. He waited, and in that pause, small, impossible, holy something in Ren loosened. She nodded. Barely. Kalen lifted the sigil and set it against her collarbone with careful precision, as if her skin might bruise from the weight of his touch. The metal was cold for half a second, then it flared. Light smoke, silver and midnight black, burst across Ren's skin in a crescent bloom. Heat rushed through her veins like a river breaking its banks. The mark settled at her collarbone, pulsing once, as if it had always belonged there. A collective gasp swept the hall. The court erupted into whispers, then louder voices, then outright shock. Ren stood frozen, staring at the glowing crescent as if it were a sentence carved into her body. Kalen turned toward the room, his expression calm, his posture lethal. When he spoke, the words didn't sound like a declaration. They sounded like law. "By night law," he said, the voice carrying without effort. "She is under my protection." For a moment, Ren almost believed the universe had shifted in her favor. Then she saw Garrick's smile. Not surprised, not afraid, satisfied like a man who had already planned for this. He reached inside his coat and produced a folded document sealed in red wax. He held it up for the court to see as if he were presenting a gift. "Protection," Garrick said smoothly, eyes gleaming as they met Ren's. "Doesn't erase ownership, Your Majesty." And Ren felt the floor tilt beneath her. Because she understood in an instant. Kalen hadn't just chosen her. He'd stepped into a trap that had been waiting for her all along. The parchment was clean. Too clean. Wren had spent her whole life around documents that mattered: ration slips, work ledgers, old notices nailed to packhouse doors. They always carried fingerprints, smudges, tiny signs of being handled by human hands. This one looked like it had never been touched by anyone who sweated or bled. It looked like it had been born perfect. Duke Garrick Valtrain held it out with the same polished confidence he wore like armor. The red wax seal gleaming under moonstone light. The crest stamped into that seal. Valtrain's wolf head crowned in thorns was so sharp it might as well have cut the air. Wren's stomach dropped before she even read a word, because she'd seen that crest on gates, on weapons, on the cuffs of guards who smiled while they shoved unranked girls into wagons. It was real, or it was meant to be believed. King Kalen Nightmore took the document without looking at Garrick. His fingers were steady, but the shadows near his knuckles stirred, as if the darkness itself didn't like what it touched. He unfolded the parchment once. Read it, then read it again. Slower. Wren watched his face, hunting for any sign of relief. Any crack that meant he'd found an obvious lie. She found none. His jaw tightened. A muscle ticking near his cheekbone. The crescent mark at Wren's collarbone still pulsed faintly, warm under her skin, like it had branded her with a promise. But the promise suddenly felt thin, fragile. Like glass held over fire, the court began to murmur. The sound built in waves, silk whispers, hissing laughter, outrage dressed up as concern. People leaned toward each other, hungry for a scandal that didn't involve them. Wren felt their eyes like pins, poking and prodding at the parts of her they could reach. Is it registered? It has to be registered. Valtrain wouldn't dare present it otherwise. If it's registered, it's binding. Binding. The word made Wren's mouth go dry. Kalen lowered the parchment slightly and looked at her, not at the mark, not at her dress, not at the way she stood too stiff like a cornered animal, at her eyes and the way he said it quiet. A certain, almost furious made something ache in her chest. You are not property. Wren swallowed hard. The sentence should have been simple. It should have been obvious. But no one had ever said it to her like it was law instead of wishful thinking. Garrick's smile didn't falter. If anything, it sharpened. A deed of claim, he announced to the room, voice smooth as poured honey. Wren Halcyon is indebted to Valtrain House for care and shelter since childhood. The debt is payable. The claim is legal. Wren's vision tunneled. Care and shelter. Like he'd been some kind of savior instead of the man who'd stalked her life from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to close his fist. Kalen's gaze flicked down again. Wren forced herself to read over his shoulder. The words swam, then snapped into focus, like a blade catching light. By long-standing covenant between House Valtrain and the unranked wards of Mooncourt territory, her throat tightened. The undersigned end. Wren Halcyon. Acknowledges debt. She hadn't signed anything. She'd never even seen this. And then she saw the date. 3 days ago. Her heart stuttered. 3 days ago, she'd been sleeping on a cot in the back of a laundry house, dreaming of nothing but survival. 3 days ago, she'd been invisible. So why? Why now? Because tonight was the night the Shadow King had chosen her. Because tonight was the night she'd stopped being invisible. Because Garrick had written this trap the moment he realized she might slip through his fingers. Wren looked up, and for the first time she saw something behind Garrick's eyes that made her skin go cold. Not desire, not even greed. Certainty. He believed this was already done. A new sound cut through the court's murmurs. Heavy footsteps. Measured and synchronized. The elders arrived. They wore long robes, threaded with pale silver. Rings stacked on their fingers like shackles made beautiful. Their eyes held the flat, emotionless sheen of people who had decided long ago that law mattered more than lives. The one in front, Elder Marrow, stopped at the edge of the gathering like the room belonged to him by default. His gaze landed on Wren's bond mark and lingered, displeased. Then he looked at Kalen. Not afraid. Not respectful. Calculating. A registered claim cannot be broken. Elder Marrow said, voice carrying like a gavel strike. Without proof of forgery, Wren's hands curled into fists so tightly her nails bit her palms. Proof of forgery. As if the burden was hers. As if the world wouldn't rather believe she'd signed herself away than admit a duke had cheated. Kaelin's voice stayed calm. But it went colder. Deeper. Then we will find proof. Elder Marrow's eyes narrowed. Almost amused. Proof is not a feeling. Your Majesty. It is not instinct. It is not shadows. The way he said shadows made it sound like disease. Garrick stepped closer. Just enough that Wren could smell him again. Just enough that only she would hear. I told you, he whispered, warm with satisfaction. Ink by midnight. Wren's stomach twisted. But she didn't look away. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. Across from her, Kaelin's shoulders went still, as if he'd sensed the whisper even without hearing it. The shadows at his feet shifted. Restless, the court began to split into factions by instinct, those eager to see Wren dragged down, those eager to see the Shadow King humbled, those eager to watch and bet on the outcome like it was sport. Wren stood in the center of it, the mark on her collarbone glowing softly. As if mocking her, a bond mark didn't erase paperwork. A king's protection didn't erase ownership. That was what they wanted her to believe. Kaelin's hand flexed once, like he was containing something violent. His gaze pinned Elder Marrow. She is under my protection, he repeated. Slower. That is also law. Elder Marrow's lips tightened. Protection is not possession. Your Majesty, and even kings answer to the covenant. Covenant. Another word that tasted like a cage. Wren tried to breathe. In, out, but the air felt thick, heavy with perfume and politics, and the sharp edge of fear. Then her echo sight hit her like a fist. No warning. No choice. One moment she was standing in the moon court with everyone watching her. The next, the world lurched. Her vision snapped sideways, as if someone had grabbed her mind by the hair and yanked. She wasn't seeing through her own eyes anymore. She was seeing through someone else's. Everything turned slightly wrong, angles sharper, colors colder. The room framed from behind velvet. She saw the edge of the curtain up close. The weave of it. The way it trembled as someone breathed behind it. She saw Wren standing out there in the open, bright as a target. She saw Kaelin beside her like a storm-given skin, and she felt something dark in the watcher's chest hunger. Delight. Anticipation. Prey. Wren's own body, wherever it was, went rigid. She tried to fight the pull, to tear free. But Echo Sight didn't ask permission. It just took, in the watcher's view, a hand lifted. Gloved in black, fingers pressed the velvet aside by a sliver, and the eyes behind the curtain locked on Wren like they'd been waiting for this exact moment. Then, the vision snapped back. Wren gasped, the sound ripping out of her like she'd been underwater too long. Her knees wobbled. For a heartbeat, she thought she might fall right there in front of everyone. Kaelin's attention whipped to her instantly, sharp and protective. And the worst part, the part that made her blood go ice, was the certainty blooming in her gut. Someone had been watching her before Kaelin arrived. Someone had been waiting behind those curtains like a predator behind tall grass. Before she could speak, before she could even warn him, a scream tore through the hall. It wasn't polite. It wasn't muffled. It was raw and frantic and real. A servant girl burst into view. Face white, eyes wide, hair half fallen from its pins. She looked at the elders like she wanted to speak but couldn't find words. Then she pointed toward the side corridor. Please, she choked out. Oh, please. Wren didn't think. Her feet moved on instinct, the scream pulling her like a hook. She pushed through the crowd before anyone could stop her, its heart hammering so hard it hurt. The corridor was colder than the ballroom. The light was dimmer. The air smelled wrong. Copper. Blood. Wren rounded the corner and stopped so abruptly the world seemed to slam into her ribs. A girl lay on the stone floor. One of the unranked. Her chain-line bracelet was still on her wrist. Broken links scattered beside her like spilled teeth. Blood pooled beneath her head. Dark and glossy. And across the wall, someone had written a message in her life. Strays don't wear crowns. Wren's breath came out in a thin, broken sound. Her echo sight snapped again. Vicious and unavoidable. 3 seconds. That's all she got. But it was enough. She saw black claws flexing over blood-slick stone. She saw a moonlit grin too wide. Too pleased. And she saw a ring flashing in the killer's hand. The Voltrain crest. Only it wasn't pure silver. It was twisted with shadow. As if darkness had seeped into the metal and made it rot from the inside. The vision shattered. Wren lurched back into herself with a gasp. The corridor spinning. She tasted bile. She tasted fear. Footsteps thundered behind her. Fast and decisive, Kalen reached her in a heartbeat and moved between her and the body without hesitation. His stance an instinctive shield. The shadows at his feet surged, pressing outward as if they wanted to swallow the corridor whole. Wren realized she was shaking again, not from the sight of blood, from the knowledge that this was no longer just about a contract. This was an attack, a message, a warning. Kalen's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Low and urgent. Wren. She looked up. And for the first time she saw something in his eyes that wasn't just danger. It was fear for her. "Can I hold you?" he asked. The question shouldn't have mattered in a hallway painted with death, but it did, because it meant he still saw her as a person in the middle of chaos. Not a symbol. Not a weapon. Not a scandal. A person. Wren's throat tightened so hard she could barely speak. "Still." She forced the word out. "Yes." Kalen pulled her into him. Firm and careful at once. His arms went around her like a promise. Like a wall. She felt the controlled tremor in his body. The rage he was keeping leashed so it wouldn't explode and burn everyone in reach. Behind them, voices flooded the corridor elders. Guards. Nobles drawn by blood like flies. Garrick's voice rose above the rest. Perfectly composed. "How tragic," he said. Loud enough for all to hear. "And how convenient. A dead girl and a sympathy play. The same night our unranked stray is crowned by shadow." Wren's stomach clenched. She pulled back just enough to look at Kalen. This was what Garrick wanted. Not just to own her by ink. To stain her by blood. The elders pressed into the corridor. Faces grim. Eyes sharp. Elder Marrow looked at the message on the wall. Then at Wren. As if weighing her like a verdict. "This requires emergency council session," he said. Wren felt the trap closing. Tightening. Metal against bone. She understood it with brutal clarity. The trap wasn't just legal. It was criminal. And someone had set it to snap on her throat. As the elders turned, her bond mark warmed against Kalen's chest, like it sensed what was coming. Like it tried to warn her before the words fell. In the council chamber. She would learn the name of the law they were about to use. A law so old it tasted like ash. The severance clause. The council chamber was colder than the ballroom. Colder than the blood-stained corridor. Colder than any place Wren had ever been forced to stand and pretend she didn't feel small. It wasn't the temperature. It was the intent. The chamber had been built to make people remember who held power. The ceiling arched too high. The walls too bare. The long table too polished. Everything designed to swallow sound and swallow hope. Moonstone lamps burned with pale, sterile light. The air smelled faintly of ink and iron. Like a place where decisions were written in something heavier than words. Wren stood beside Kalen at the center of it. Her bond mark a warm pulse against her skin that felt increasingly like a target. Across the table, the elders sat in a row, silver-threaded robes. Stacked rings. Faces carved into expressions that could pass for neutrality if you didn't know what hunger looked like in human form. Elder Marrow rested his hands on the table, fingers interlaced, and regarded Wren as if she were a problem to be solved. "Wren Halcyon," he said. Voice smooth with false civility. Unranked. Unregistered. Unclaimed until tonight. Wren's jaw tightened. Kaylin's presence beside her was a steady pressure. The calm before a storm. She could feel the shadows at his feet shifting. Impatient. Like wolves pacing behind a thin fence. The girl is under my protection, Kaylin said. Evenly, Elder Marrow's gaze flicked to the crescent mark at Ren's collarbone. Unimpressed. So you say. And yet the realm is already bleeding for it. He gestured to a scribe. The scribe slid a thin slate forward etched in silver. The kind of thing that held law magic like a cup held poison. The message. Elder Marrow continued. The body. The panic in the court. We have witnesses who claim the unranked girl was seen running toward the corridor moments before the scream. Ren's stomach turned. Of course they had witnesses. They always had witnesses when it served them. She ran toward a scream. Kaylin said, voice tightening by a fraction. That is not guilt. That is instinct. Elder Marrow's eyes narrowed. Instinct, he repeated, tasting the word like something sour. Then he turned the slate so the silver etching caught the light. This is the severance clause. Ren had heard the name before. Whispered like a curse in kitchens and laundry houses. A law old enough to outlive compassion. Elder Marrow read it aloud. Each word crisp and final. A ruler's protective claim may be stripped if said claim endangers the realm. Ren understood the translation instantly. We don't like what you chose. Another elder leaned forward. Her voice soft, almost pitying. Your mark is unusual. King Nightmore. Your magic is complicated. And now, within minutes of your claim, we have a murder and a blood message aimed at the unranked. Ren felt heat rise in her chest rage. Humiliation. Disbelief. You're blaming me for being targeted, she said. Before she could stop herself, the elder's expression didn't change. We are acknowledging what your presence has stirred. Kaylin's shadows surged, crawling up his boots like smoke. The lamps flickered in response. As if the knight in him resented being caged by moonlight. You're using fear as an excuse, Kaylin said, his voice low. Because you can't stand that I chose outside your bloodlines. Elder Marrow didn't deny it. He didn't have to. The silence did it for him. Then he spoke again. And his tone hardened. Until the murder is solved, he said. Ren Halcyon will be placed into neutral custody. Ren's lungs tightened. Neutral custody. She'd learned young that neutral was a word the powerful used when they wanted to hide their cruelty under a clean label. She looked at Kaylin. And something in her chest sank. Because she saw it in his eyes, too. Neutral custody meant one thing in the Moon Court. Valtrain custody. No, Ren said. It came out as a single, raw syllable. Kaylin stepped forward, and the temperature seemed to drop with him. The shadows along his arms rose higher, swirling, living, ready for a heartbeat. Ren thought he might actually do it, tear this chamber apart, swallow the elders in darkness, burn their law to ash. Then his shadows stopped, not because he chose to, because something unseen locked around him. The air shimmered. The silver rings on the elders' hands glowed faintly, and Ren felt the law magic snap into place like a collar around a throat. Kaylin's jaw clenched so hard she thought it might crack. He tried to move again. His body went rigid, restrained by invisible force. The elders watched him with cold satisfaction, like men watching a beast discover the limits of its chain. Elder Marrow's voice was almost gentle. You will comply, Your Majesty. The severance clause binds even kings. Kaylin's breath came out slow, controlled, but Ren could feel the violence under his skin. Contained only because the law demanded it, she took a step toward him. Instinctively, as if she could shield him from the humiliation of being restrained. And that's when Kaylin turned his head and looked at her like she was the only real thing left in the room. Look at me, Ren, he said quietly. Her throat tightened. She did. His eyes were a storm, furious, helpless, blazing with a promise he couldn't speak in front of them without giving them another excuse to tighten the chain. If they take you, His voice broke on the edge of the words. Just enough to make her chest ache. I will come anyway. Ren's pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to cling to the vow like a lifeline, but she had lived too long under men like Garrick to trust promises that law could crush. They'll destroy you, she whispered, the words trembling despite her effort to hold them steady. They'll call you a monster. They'll turn the whole realm against you. Kalen's gaze didn't waver. I'd rather be destroyed, he said, voice rough with truth. Then let them keep you. For a heartbeat. The chamber vanished. There was only his vow and her breath, and the bond mark warming like it was answering him. Then the elders moved. Not rushing. Not dramatic. Efficient. Elder Marrow lifted a hand. Retrieved the girl. Boots sounded behind Ren. She turned. And Garrick's guards were already there. Black uniforms. Valtrain crest on their collars. Eyes empty as doors. Ren stepped back automatically. But there was nowhere to go. The chamber was designed for judgment, not escape. A gloved hand closed around her arm. Her skin crawled. She twisted, trying to pull away. But a second guard grabbed her other side, fingers digging into bone with practiced force. No, Ren said again. Louder now. And her voice echoed off the cold stone. You can't. You can. Garrick's voice cut in, smooth and satisfied, drifting from the doorway as he entered like he owned the air itself. Because the council just said so. Ren's heart hammered. She looked at Kalen. He was still bound in place, the law magic holding him like iron bands. His shadows boiled along his arms, furious and useless, pressed against an invisible barrier, his eyes locked on hers. In them, Ren saw everything he couldn't do, everything he wanted to do, everything he was promising anyway. She tried to memorize that look. Because some part of her, the part that had survived by expecting the worst, knew this might be the last time she saw him free. Garrick stepped closer, and his smile was almost tender. Don't fight, he murmured, as if giving advice. It'll only bruise you. Ren's stomach turned with disgust. She fought anyway. Not because she thought she could win, but because surrender felt like dying. The guards tightened their grip and dragged her toward the door. Ren's dress snagged on the stone threshold. The seam tore with a soft rip that sounded far too loud. Her bond mark pulsed hot, like it was screaming. She twisted her head one last time. Kalen stood rigid, bound by the elder's law. But his eyes burned with something more dangerous than magic. A promise. A vow written without ink, a threat, and as Ren was pulled out of the chamber, the last thing she saw was the Shadow King's gaze, furious, helpless, and promising violence. Valtrain Manor rose out of the night like a jewel set into a blade. From the outside, it was stunning pale stone. High windows, ironwork balconies wrapped in sleeping ivy. Warm light glowed behind glass like the home of someone kind. But Ren had learned a truth that never failed her. Beautiful things could still be built to hurt you. Inside, the halls were polished so brightly she could see her own reflection wide-eyed. Pale, dragged between guards like a criminal. Marble floors gleamed. Tapestries whispered of noble history. Candles flickered in gold sconces, casting gentle shadows that pretended to be harmless. It was beautiful in the way a knife was beautiful. Polished, cold, designed to cut. They led her into a sitting room that smelled of cedar and expensive smoke. The guards released her with the kind of care that said they didn't want visible marks, then stepped back like statues. Garrick entered a moment later carrying a tray, silk-wrapped bread, a cup of dark wine, a bowl of steaming soup. Comfort arranged like an offering. Ren stared at it, unwilling to accept even the illusion of kindness. Garrick set the tray down and smiled. Eat, he said. You'll need strength. For what? Ren's voice was sharp. For surviving me, she thought. Garrick's eyes glittered. For making the right choice. He gestured toward a chair like he was hosting a guest instead of holding a prisoner. When Ren didn't move, he shrugged and sat himself. crossing one leg over the other with effortless entitlement. "You were always going to end up here," he said. "Conversational. The only difference is now you've entertained the entire court first." Ren's hands clenched. "You forged that deed." Garrick laughed softly. "Forged is such an ugly word. I prefer arranged." Ren's breath caught. "Why?" His smile faded. And for the first time, his voice carried something like sincerity twisted. "Selfish sincerity, but real. Because you're valuable," he said. "And because your little gift, your echo site, was never meant to belong to you." Ren went still. "How do you know about that?" Garrick leaned forward, elbows on his knees, gaze fixed on her like a collector admiring a rare artifact. "I know," he said, "because I paid to have you made an orphan." The words struck her like a slap. Ren's vision blurred for a second. Not from echo sight this time, just from shock. "You're lying," she whispered. Garrick's expression barely changed. "A raid is easy to arrange when the right men are hungry and the right guards are paid to look away." "Tragic." "Really? Your parents fought. They screamed. You survived." Ren's throat tightened until swallowing felt impossible. Her chest ached with a grief so old she thought it had turned to stone. Garrick watched it happen. Calm. "I didn't do it because I hated them," he continued. "I did it because your bloodline has potential. You were easier to shape without anyone in your ear telling you what you were." Ren's hands trembled. Not from fear, from the urge to rip his throat out with her bare hands. He sat back, satisfied, as if he'd just offered her clarity. "What do you want from me?" she demanded. Garrick's smile returned. Smaller now. Crueler. Control. He let the word hang, then explained it like a man describing a simple business plan. "Pack leaders are stubborn. Councils are stubborn. Kings are stubborn," he said. "But a kingdom is easier to rule when everyone sees what you want them to see." Ren's stomach dropped. "A linked vision," she whispered, understanding with sudden horror. "You want to use me to steer them," Garrick said easily. "To guide them. To make them agree without realizing they've been led." Ren swallowed hard. "No." Garrick's eyes hardened. He reached into his coat and pulled out a second parchment and a small ink vial. The same clean perfection. The same smell of trap. "Sign," he said, voice still calm, but the air around him sharpening. "Confirm your debt. Confirm your custody. Confirm that you will cooperate." Ren stared at the ink. Midnight ink. She shook her head. "No." For a heartbeat. The room held still. Then Garrick's smile vanished entirely. "Very well," he said softly. "We'll do it another way." Ren didn't see him move. One moment he was sitting. The next, he was standing close enough that she could feel his breath. He didn't grab her wrist. He didn't strike her. He simply reached out and pressed 2 fingers lightly to the crescent bond mark at her collarbone. Ren's skin flared hot under his touch. Then her lungs seized. It wasn't like being choked by hands. It was worse. It was like the air itself refused to enter her. Ren inhaled and got nothing but a shallow, useless sip. Panic surged instantly. Wild and consuming. She tried again. Harder. Her chest burned. Her throat clenched. The room tilted. Her heartbeat slammed in her ears. Garrick watched, almost curious. "Contract magic is versatile," he murmured. "Most people think it binds the wrist, the ankle, the tongue. But breath," he smiled faintly. "Breath is obedience." Ren clawed at her throat. Eyes stinging, lungs screaming. She stumbled back and hit the wall, sliding down it as her vision speckled with black. Panic shattered her thoughts into fragments. Kaelin, the bond mark, the council, the body, the message, and then something else, something beneath the panic. A sound. No multiple sounds. Heartbeats. Not just hers, not just the guards. Distant. Numerous. Layered. Like threads tugging at her spine from far away. Ren gasped again. Desperate. And for a heartbeat. The room vanished under the rush of sensation. She felt the manor like a living thing, felt the wolves in its walls, the guards in its halls, the servants in the kitchens, the patrol outside the gates, felt, somewhere beyond Valtrain's land, far beyond another heartbeat that throbbed in perfect sync with her own. Kaelin, the bond mark burned. Ren's fingers curled against the stone. And a word slipped out of her mouth without permission, raw. Instinctive. Ancient. Latch. The moment she said it, the pressure on her lungs loosened slightly. Just enough to drag in a thin breath. Garrick's eyes narrowed. What did you say? Ren didn't answer. She couldn't. She was still trying to breathe. But inside her chest, that word echoed, like it had woken something up. Latch. Link. Bind not with chains, but with connection, and somewhere far away. In whatever place the severance clause had forced Kaelin into. The Shadow King stiffened like he felt it, like Ren's voice had reached him through the bond mark, like the promise in his eyes had just found a path to become real. The nights inside Valtrain Manor didn't feel like nights. They felt like something held over Ren's head heavy. Inevitable. Waiting to drop. She learned the rhythms quickly. Because survival had always been her sharpest skill. The servants moved like ghosts. Eyes down. Hands fast. The guards rotated in quiet patterns. Boots whispering over marble. Garrick came and went as if the house was an extension of his body. And every time he passed Ren's door, she felt him the way prey felt, a predator circling a clearing. On the second day, he finally told her why time mattered. The red moon rises in 2 nights, he said, almost casually, as if discussing weather. He poured himself a drink and didn't offer her one. And when it does, the veil between bond and will is thin enough to slice. Ren sat rigid on the edge of the polished chair, the wrists still sore beneath the sleeves of the dress he'd forced on her soft fabric meant to hide bruises. You're planning a ritual, she said. Garrick smiled. Pleased she was catching up. A binding circle, he corrected, savoring the words. Beneath my manor, runes carved into stone, silver chains forged in moonlight, and a bowl carved from black bone. The imagery made Ren's skin prickle. It sounded like something ripped from a nightmare and made real by wealth. You're insane, she whispered. No. Garrick's voice stayed mild. I'm ambitious. He leaned back, watching her like she was an instrument he intended to tune. Your echo sight is impressive, Ren, but it's limited. 3 seconds here, 3 seconds there. Flickers, glimpses. Ren held his gaze, refusing to flinch. It's mine. Garrick's smile thinned. Nothing powerful stays mine for long. Not if someone stronger wants it. He reached into his coat and produced a small vial, a dark liquid that looked almost like ink, but thicker, heavier. He set it on the table like a promise. I have help, he said. Ren's stomach tightened. What kind? Garrick's eyes gleamed with something sharper than cruelty reverence. Almost a seer, he said. Corrupted. Yes, that's what the council would call it. But corruption is just another word for evolution. Ren's breath caught. A corrupted seer could do things normal seers couldn't: bend visions, hijack them, turn sight into a weapon. You're lying, she said, because she needed it to be a lie. Garrick's smile returned, slow and assured. She can slip into your echo sight the way a blade slips between ribs. She can take your vision while you're using it. She can show you what she wants you to see, or show others what you see. Ren's mouth went dry. You want to control pack leaders, she said, voice hollow now. Realization clicking into place. You want to use me to steer them. I want to rule them. Garrick corrected. And with you, I won't need armies. I'll need only one girl with pretty eyes and a gift that makes kings kneel without knowing why. Ren's hands clenched. Kaelin won't let you. For the first time, Garrick's expression twitched annoyance. Like hearing the name of an obstacle. The Shadow King is a problem, he admitted. But the severance clause made him a contained one. Ren's bond mark warmed, as if it hated hearing Kaelin spoken of like a chained beast. Garrick leaned forward, his voice dropping, softer in a way that felt more dangerous. Do you know why your parents died? Ren, her heart slammed once. Hard. You already told me. She forced out. Because you paid for a raid. I paid for the raid. He agreed. But you've never asked why I cared enough to spend that kind of gold. Ren's throat tightened. She didn't want to hear the answer. Garrick smiled anyway. Your mother wasn't unranked. The room went still. Ren stared at him. The words not quite landing. My mother. Her voice cracked. She scrubbed floors. She hid. Garrick cut in, impatient with sentiment. Because hiding is what people do when the realm would rather use them than protect them. Ren felt cold creep into her bones. What was she? Garrick's eyes glittered. The last latch-bearer. The phrase made something inside Ren twist. Like a lock turning. The one who could unite packs without domination. Garrick continued, savoring each word. The one who could link hearts and instincts so they moved as one without a collar. Without chains. Without force. Ren's chest tightened. That's not real. It was, Garrick said, and it will be again. Through you. Ren's breath came shallow. Images flashed behind her eyes, her mother's hands. Always warm, her mother's voice. Always careful, the way she used to hum when she braided Ren's hair. Like she was trying to stitch peace into a world that refused it. That's why she was killed. Garrick said softly, almost tender now, as if he enjoyed the pain. Because a latchbearer makes the council obsolete. Makes dukes like me unnecessary. Makes kings less controllable. Ren's stomach rolled. Your mother died. Garrick finished. Because she wouldn't be owned. Ren stood abruptly, chair legs scraping the floor. Her pulse roared in her ears. Rage surged so hot it almost blinded her. You can't have me, she said, voice shaking. You can't turn me into her and then chain me like a dog. Garrick's smile returned. I'm delighted. I don't need your permission. That's the beauty of contracts. Ren moved before she thought toward the door, toward the hallway, toward anything that wasn't him. The guards outside shifted instantly, blocking her path like walls. Let her try, Garrick said lazily. Ren shoved at the nearest guard. Desperate. He didn't even stumble. She darted the other way. Heart hammering, feet slipping on polished marble. For one wild second, she thought she could make it, thought she could reach a window. A stairwell. Some crack in the perfect knife of this house. Then her lungs seized. The contract spell tightened on her breath like a fist closing. Air vanished. Ren staggered, hands clawing at her throat. Panic ripping through her faster than thought. She tried to inhale nothing. Her chest burned. Her vision speckled with black. She hit the floor hard, the impact jarring her bones. Above her, Garrick's voice drifted down, calm as a lullaby. You see, none of it is free. Ren's body trembled, trapped between the need to breathe and the terror that she couldn't. Darkness licked the edges of her sight, and then, in the middle of the panic, something warmer cut through, a whisper. Not Garrick, not the seer he promised. A voice that didn't belong in this house. Kaelin. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even fully sound. It was a presence in her mind. Steady as a heartbeat. Breathe with me, he murmured through the bond. Soft enough to feel like fingertips on her skin. In, out, I've got you. Ren's eyes stung. She didn't know if it was real. She didn't know if she was hallucinating from lack of air. But Kaelin's voice didn't sound like a dream. It sounded like a hand reaching across distance and law and rage. In, he said again. Patient. Slow. With me. Ren forced her chest to move even though it hurt. Forced herself to follow the rhythm he gave her like it was a rope she could cling to. Out, Kaylin whispered. Good. Again, something shifted subtle. But real. The contract spell didn't break. Ren could feel it still wrapped around her like a chain, but it loosened. Just enough. A thin breath slid into her lungs like a miracle. Ren gasped. Shuddering. Dragging air and greedy. Shaking pulls. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed her forehead to the cold floor and kept breathing because she needed to prove she could. Kaylin's voice stayed with her. Steady and fierce beneath the softness. I'm coming, he said. And the words didn't feel like hope. They felt like inevitability. Ren's bond mark warmed, pulsing against her skin like it was answering him. Like it was forging a path through the severance clause with sheer will. Garrett crouched a few feet away, watching her recover with a lazy satisfaction that made Ren want to vomit. Sweet, he murmured. You're already learning. When you obey, you get to breathe. Ren lifted her head, hatred sharp in her eyes. She didn't answer him, because somewhere beyond these walls, beyond the council's laws, beyond Garrick's contracts, she could feel something building like thunder gathering on the horizon. That night, the manor didn't feel quiet. It felt warned. The next evening, the air turned heavy with storm. Servants moved faster. Guards doubled at entrances. Garrick's smile grew brighter. Too bright. Like a man celebrating before the victory was earned. Ren sat in the room they'd locked her in and listened to the house breathe. Listened to distant footsteps. Listened to the way her bond mark kept pulsing like a countdown. The red moon was coming. 2 nights. 1 night. Soon. And beneath the manor, the binding circle waited. Runes carved deep. Silver chains laid out like hungry snakes. A bowl of black bone ready to drink whatever Garrick intended to spill. Ren's fingers curled around the edge of the bed until her knuckles ached. She didn't pray. She didn't beg. She just breathed. In, out, with the rhythm Kaylin had given her. And then, above ground, the world finally cracked. Thunder split the sky so violently the windows rattled in their frames. Alarm bells screamed to life. Frantic and shrill, ripping through the manor like a knife through silk. Ren shot upright, heart slamming. Shouts echoed in the halls. Boots pounded. Steel rang against steel, and through it all, she felt him like the night itself had stepped onto Voltrain land and decided it was done waiting. Because Kaylin Nightmore had arrived at the gates, not alone, not asking permission, with an army that wasn't supposed to exist. Ren closed her eyes, and for the first time in her life, she didn't reach to survive. She reached to connect, not to dominate, not to command, heart to heart, breath to breath. She let the bond mark burn like a doorway, and she stepped through it with her soul. The latch answered. It ignited in her chest like lightning choosing a spine. And suddenly the battlefield wasn't chaos anymore. It was a living map of pulses and instincts and fierce, stubborn wills. Threads of light and shadow snapped into place across the manor grounds, linking wolves and warriors in a web that hummed with one shared truth. We are not alone. Fear didn't vanish, but it muted. Like a scream swallowed by a hand, courage surged through the pack line, steady and synchronized, as if every fighter remembered at once what they were made for. Blades lifted, claws bared, voices rose, not scattered, but united, and Ren felt Kaylin, staggering, poisoned, trying to stay upright on rage alone. She didn't hesitate. She reached into him through the bond mark and pulled. The poison came like ice through her veins, a black burn that stole her breath for one terrifying second. Kaylin's knees buckled, and his voice tore through the link, hoarse with panic. Ren, don't. Her vision blurred. But she clung to the rhythm he'd given her in the dark. In, out, I'm not leaving you, she whispered, dragging the poison into herself long enough to purge it back through the bond mark, forcing it out like smoke expelled from lungs. Not in this life. The darkness ripped free. Kaelin gasped real air. Real life. His shadows surging with renewed fury. Across the circle, Garrick saw what she'd become and lunged for it like a starving man for bread. He reached for the latch with greedy hands, and it rejected him, violently. The web of connections snapped like a whip, flinging him backward. His borrowed power shattered around him. And at the same moment, the corrupted seer's illusion collapsed, like a glass mask cracking. The frame-up, the murder lies, the shadow stitching, all of it revealed in ugly, undeniable truth. Garrick scrambled, desperate, toward the ritual circle he'd built to cage Ren. But the law magic he worshipped recognized him now as the one who broke it. The chains rose, the runes flared, and Garrick Valtrain was dragged into his own binding circle. Screaming as the contract magic closed like a mouth, the law that was used to cage her became the law that ended him. When the noise finally thinned into ragged breathing and falling ash, Kaelin sank to his knees in the ruins of the circle. He looked up at Ren like she was the only light left in the world. "May I?" His voice shook, raw and reverent. "Claim you for real. For forever." Ren laughed through tears she didn't bother to hide. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes." Their bond mark brightened, sealed like night itself had chosen them and never planned to let go. And when the moon court finally saw Ren Halcyon again, she wasn't wearing borrowed velvet. She was wearing a crown made of night and choice. If you felt that ending in your chest, tell me what you'd do if you were Ren. Would you forgive the court? Or burn it down and start over? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you love romantic fantasy with fated bonds, dark kings, and heroines who rise from ash, please like, share, and subscribe to Moonfire Tales for the next story.